Hello guys, welcome back. Today we're going to start our unit on percentages. So today's lesson we're just going to begin by looking at how do fractions, decimals, and percentages relate to one another. Now you should already know how fractions and decimals relate. We did that in a previous lesson, and if you need to refresh your memory, please go back and watch that. But I want to talk about how all three of those relate, because really there's multiple different ways that we can represent the same number. And that's what we're talking about here. Once you figure out how you can play with numbers and substitute them in for each other, your calculations using these things are going to become immensely easier. So first let's just define a percentage. A percent is a ratio or a comparison of a quantity to 100. And if you'll recall, we can write ratios as in fraction form. So that would mean that our denominator is always going to be 100. So if I have a percentage and I want to write it as a fraction, all I have to do is take that number, write it over 100. So for example, 70%. That means I have a ratio of 70 to 100. So I'm going to write it in that fractal form or fractional form. 70 over 100. However, this is not in its simplest form, so then I'm going to reduce. So 70% in its simplest form would be 7/10. Now, if we're converting a decimal to a percentage, it's nice and easy. All we have to do is multiply by 100. And what that means is that our decimal moves 2 spots to the right. So if I have a decimal like 3/100, 0.03, if I multiply that by 100, basically what I'm saying is I move my decimal twice, I'm going to wind up with 3%. So obviously if we're multiplying by 100 to go from a decimal to a percentage, if we're going the other way from a percentage to a decimal, I'm then going to undo that by dividing by 100 or moving my decimal 2 places to the left. So 67% becomes 0.67. Those are important to remember. If you can remember how your decimals and your percentages relate, those are the most common way that we flip-flop numbers from decimals to percentages because we have to use the decimal in our calculations. So it's really important that you remember these bottom two. This is important as well, but more commonly you're going to need to know those bottom 2 rules. So now we're just going to do some examples taking a look at these. So here I have some ratios that I want to rename as a percentage. Well, if you'll recall, I told you a percentage is a ratio of something to 100. So all I need to do is make sure that my ratio is written to 100. And if it's not, I want to write an equivalent ratio that is to 100, and then I'll get my percentage. So if you look here, I have 50 to 100. Well, that's already over 100, so that means that this is 50%. Nice and easy, just that simple. Didn't have to rewrite anything on that one. It was already written as a ratio to 100. Here you'll notice I have 3 to 10. Well, I want it as a ratio to 100, so I'm going to rewrite an equivalent ratio. So how am I going to make 10 into 100? Well, I'm going to multiply by 10. 10 times 10 is 100. Since I multiplied this side by 10, I need to do the same to the other to make it equivalent. And again, if you're a little spotty on that concept, you can go back and rewatch that video too. We've talked about that one. Now I have it as a ratio of 30 to 100, so 30% would be my percentage. Percentages are always as a ratio to 100. So once I have either my fraction or my ratio to 100, I know I'm good. Here I have 60 to 1,000. So this is too big. I don't want 1,000. So I'm going to rewrite this because I want it to be a ratio to 100. So how did it go from 1,000 to 100? I divided by 10. Since I divided this side by 10, I need to do the same to the other side. 6 to 10 would be my equivalent ratio. Now that it's written as a ratio to 100, all I have to do is write a percentage by my first number. So that's 6%. 6 to 10 would be 6%. Here it's a little trickier. I have a 5. Well, I want to rewrite my equivalent ratio as a 1 over 100. So what did I have to multiply 5 by to get 100? 20. So I need to multiply my 4 times 20, and I get 80. So now I have it written as the ratio to 100, which means the top number becomes my percent, 80%. Nothing too complex. Here I've given you the percentage. Now we're going to go the other way. We're going to take the percentage, we're going to write it as a fraction, and then we always want to write our fractions in lowest terms. So remember, they're a ratio over 100. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take my percentage number and write it over 100. I've now written it as a fraction. I'm not done, however, because 25 100ths is not in its simplest form. This can be reduced. 25 and 100 have a greatest common factor of 25. If I divide both of them by 25, I wind up with 1/4. Maybe you didn't notice 25 right off. You could have divided by 5 and then 5 again. That would have worked as well. I just picked the biggest number. So then we're just reducing our fractions, which you know how to do. And again, if you're confused, go rewatch that video. So again, I'm starting out. I have 35%. So I'm taking my 35, I'm writing it over 100. Now again, this is not in lowest terms. These are both divisible by 5. 5 goes into 35 7 times, and it goes into 100 20 times. So in simplest form, 35% would be 7/20. 60%, again, we're writing our 60 over 100. Sorry, my numbers kind of just overlap. Let me try to write that neater so you can actually see the numbers. 60 over 100. Again, we can reduce this. 20 will go into both of these numbers. 20 goes into 60 3 times and into 100 5 times, so 3/5. So here, just write my number over 100. This is not in simplest form. Both of these are divisible by 4, so it reduces to 1/25. Okay. Nothing too hard there. Again, okay, so now I'm going to write each fraction or decimal as a percentage. Now there's two ways I can look at these fractions. I can take the fractions and I can write an equivalent fraction over 100, or what I could do is I could change them into a decimal. This one I'll change into a decimal. This one is pretty easy to convert into its equivalent over 100 because I can multiply by 10. Now that it's over 100, I know that it's 40%. The nice thing about decimals is they're pretty easy. If I have a decimal, all I have to do is multiply it by 100. All that does is move my decimal over 2 spots. So if I move my decimal over 2 spots, I wind up with 38%. So this one, 5/8, I could convert that into its equivalent over 100, or I could simply take 5 divided by 8 to make this into its equivalent decimal, which is 0.625. All right? I'm going to do it that way. Only because 8 won't go into 100 evenly, so then I'd be multiplying by a decimal. So I'm going to convert it into this, also because I find it easier to change decimals into percentages, because all I have to do is move my decimal. So this is my equivalent decimal. I'm moving it 2 places. I wind up with 62.5%. And it's okay if I have a decimal or a fraction in my percentage. It just means this is somewhere between 62 and 63%. That's fine. Don't let that throw you off. This is okay. This is acceptable. Same thing's going to happen here. Multiply by 100, which means I'm moving my decimal over twice, which means I wind up with 92.5%. And the important thing to remember here is you have to write your percentage symbol, because 0.925 is not equal to 92.5. It's equal to 92.5%. So your labels are really important to make sure that you're actually writing an equivalent number. So here we're going to take the percentage, we're going to write it as a decimal. So now we're just going the opposite direction of what we had been doing. So remember, I was moving the decimal 2 places to the right. Now I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. I'm going to divide by 100. So remember, if I don't see my decimal, that means it's implied at the end. If I move it over 2 places, I wind up with 0.7. I could write 0.70, but I don't need this 0 here. That's a placeholder, okay? Those are the same numbers, 0.7 and 0.70, same number, okay? So we don't have to write that 0. You can if you like to. So same thing here. I'm going to divide by 100 or move my decimal 2 places to the left. I wind up with 0.355. And notice now I'm not writing the percentage. 0.355% is not 0.355. Those are different numbers. So you need to pay attention to what we're doing. Decimals do not get the percentage signs. They're not the same. This is a percentage. These are equivalent. 35.5% is the same as 0.355. All right? So again, we're going to divide by 100, which moves my decimal over 2 places, and I wind up with 0.6867. Here what you'll notice is I have 18 3/4. I want to change it to a decimal, which means I can't leave the fraction there. So I'm going to have to change this fraction into a decimal before I go and change my percentage. So the first thing I'm going to do is rewrite this. Still keeping the percentage, just changing 3/4 into its decimal form. all right? Because we don't want to mix decimals and fractions. Now, if I divide by 100, I wind up with 18.1875. Okay? So here, moving down to comparing, we're going to use our greater than, less than, or equal to symbols. Well, what you'll notice is I have a fraction and a percentage, which means I need to write them both in the same form in order to compare them, because it's very hard to compare apples and oranges. So we want to get them to apples. So I want to have the same thing. So it doesn't matter which way I do it. I could change them all into decimals, I could change them all into percentages, I could change them all into fractions, whatever works easiest. But I want to make sure that I have them in the same form so that I can tell which one is bigger. So what I'm going to do, 4/10 is actually pretty easy to convert into a fraction over 100, which will tell us the percentage. So to get 10 to 100, I multiplied by 10, so I multiply top by 10. 40 over 10 is 40%. So 4/10 is the same as 40%. On this side, I have 40%, so those are actually equal. Now, if I wanted, I could have changed this to a fraction and reduced it. It doesn't matter which way we go about it. This is actually one that we did on the other board when we changed this. So I'm going to change it to a percentage only because if I change this into a fraction, I'm going to need a common denominator to compare them, so it's going to be extra steps if I go that way. So I'm going to change this into its percentage. So actually the first thing I'm going to do is change it into its decimal form because that's easier for me. So if I divide the top by the bottom, I get 0.625. As a percentage, that's 62.5%, which is bigger than 60. So 5/8 would actually be greater than 60%. Finally here, this I'm just going to rewrite the equivalent over 100 because 5 will go into 100 evenly. 5 goes into 100 20 times, so I need to multiply the top by 20 as well. I get 40 over 100, which is 40%. And again, if you want, you could change that into a decimal and then change your decimal to your percentage. Either way is fine. 40% is greater than 35%, so just write in your appropriate symbol. If you're having any questions, if you're struggling with this, go ahead and rewatch the video. You can post your questions in the comment box. You can email me, and I will get to those in class. You guys have a great night.